Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor in presenting to you the President of the United States.
Our second goal is to prevent regimes that sponsor terror from threatening America or our friends and allies with weapons of mass destruction. Some of these regimes have been pretty quiet since September the 11th, but we know their true nature. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger. They could provide these arms to terrorists, giving them the means to match their hatred. They could attack our allies or attempt to blackmail the United States. In any of these cases, the price of indifference would be catastrophic. We'll be deliberate, yet time is not on our side. I will not wait on events while dangers gather. I will not stand by as peril draws closer and closer. The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
President Bush wins a big one as both the House and Senate delay, debate, then approve resolutions authorizing military force in Iraq.
I will vote to give the President the authority he needs. But I respect those who reach different conclusions. For me, the deciding factor is my belief that a united Congress will help the President unite the world.
There is no such thing as a Democrat or Republican war. We vote on this resolution in the same way brave young men and women in uniform will fight and die as a result of our vote, as Americans.
Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons. President Bush did not lash out precipitously at Iraq after 9/11. He did not snub the UN or our allies. He did not dismiss new inspection regimes. He did not ignore Congress. At each pivotal moment, he has chosen a course of moderation and deliberation, and I believe he will continue to do so. At least that is my fervent hope. I wish he would turn down the rhetorical excess in some cases, because I think it undercuts the decision he ends up making. But in each case, in my view, he has made the right, rational, and calm, deliberate decision.
In the 4 years since the inspectors left, intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. This is a very difficult vote. This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Any vote that might lead to war should be hard, but I cast it with conviction.
And let me thank the over 5,000 people in the state of Vermont who emailed, called, and wrote to me and said, do not support legislation that will allow the President of the United States to unleash a unilateral attack against Iraq. Demand that the President work with the United Nations and with the international community to get weapons inspectors into Iraq. That's what the people of Vermont have told me, and poll after poll shows that that is what the people of the United States want. We may have been in the minority today, but I have no doubt that we are representing the vast majority of the people who are scared to death about the possibility that the United States could set a precedent of a unilateral invasion of a country which could trigger disastrous results from China, Russia, and every other country in the world, who will then say, if the United States thinks it can go to war anytime it wants, why can we in China not do the same? We in Russia not do the same?
I don't oppose war in all circumstances, and when I look out over this crowd today, I know there is no shortage of patriots or patriotism. What I do oppose is a dumb war.
Last November 8th, this council passed Resolution 1441 by a unanimous vote. The purpose of that resolution was to disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had already been found guilty of material breach of its obligations, stretching back over 16 previous resolutions and 12 years. We have talked frequently here about biological weapons. By way of introduction and history, I think there are just three quick points I need to make. First, you will recall that it took UNSCOM 4 long and frustrating years to pry an admission out of Iraq that it had biological weapons. Second, when Iraq finally admitted having these weapons in 1995, the quantities were vast. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. This forced several hundred people to undergo emergency medical treatment and killed 2 postal workers just from an amount just about this quantity that was inside of an envelope. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax, and Saddam Hussein has not verifiably accounted for even 1 teaspoonful of this deadly material. And that is my third point, and it is key. The Iraqis have never accounted for all of the biological weapons they admitted they had, and we know they had. They have never accounted for all the organic material used to make them, and they have not accounted for many of the weapons filled with these agents, such as their R-400 bombs. This is evidence, not conjecture. This is true. This is all well documented. Dr. Blix told this council that Iraq has provided little evidence to verify anthrax production and no convincing evidence of its destruction. Iraq today harbors a deadly terrorist network headed by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, an associate and collaborator of Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda lieutenants. Zarqawi, a Palestinian born in Jordan, fought in the Afghan war more than a decade ago. Returning to Afghanistan in 2000, he oversaw a terrorist training camp. One of his specialties, and one of the specialties of this camp, is poisons. When our coalition ousted the Taliban, the Zarqawi network helped establish another poison and explosive training center camp, and this camp is located in northeastern Iraq. And you see a picture of this camp. The network is teaching its operatives how to produce ricin and other poisons. After we swept al-Qaeda from Afghanistan, some of its members accepted this safe haven. They remain there today. We wrote 1441 not in order to go to war. We wrote 1441 to try to preserve the peace. We wrote 1441 to give Iraq one last chance. Iraq is not so far taking that one last chance.
Behind me you see pictures of the people in Iraq. Each of their lives is as worthy as yours or mine or the person we love the most. It's our duty to see that our government destroy those lives, committing the worst crimes known to humanity. First, the crime against peace. The first offense in the Nuremberg Charter, that a war of aggression is the greatest crime against peace because there's no war until there's a war of aggression. That's exactly what they're planning to do. Thou shalt not kill.
We don't want your daddy's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your daddy's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your daddy's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your daddy's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want your daddy's war. Hey, hey. No. Bush's war has got to go. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Bush's war has got to go. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Bush's war has got to go. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Bush's war has got to go. Peace. We want it now. We want peace. Now. Peace. Now. Stop bomb. Bush, 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 stop bomb. Peace. Peace for Iraq and all oppressed people. Social justice. Stop the war in the oppressed communities, the African communities of the world.
My name is Shadi Hasri, as you just heard. I'm a member of the General Union of Palestine Students. If the U.S. is truly interested in ridding the Middle East of weapons of mass destruction, they should disarm Israel, the only country in the region who does have such weapons. No war in Iraq!
No war in Iraq.
Whatever the figures, without doubt, one of the largest gatherings, let alone protest rallies, in English history. And so we're at Piccadilly Circus, where the two large marches fuse to become one even bigger one and head to the rally at Hyde Park. Well, we can argue forever about the validity of opinion polls, but what surely matters today is that this proposed war by Britain is historically unpopular. And the mother of all focus groups has descended on London to bring that fact home to Tony Blair today.
If our plea is for America to work with others, to be good as well as powerful allies, will our retreat make them multilateralists? Or will it rather not be the biggest impulse to unilateralism that we could possibly imagine? But on this decision hangs the fate of many things, of whether we summon the strength to recognise the global challenge of the 21st century and meet it, of the Iraqi people groaning under years of dictatorship, of our armed forces, brave men and women of whom we can feel proud, whose morale is high and whose purpose is clear, of the institutions and alliances that will shape our world for years to come. To retreat now, I believe, would put at hazard all that we hold dearest.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
U.S. defense officials said today the attacks have significantly weakened the Iraqi president's elite Republican Guard troops.
The heart of Baghdad fell to U.S. forces today, and Saddam Hussein's regime largely collapsed. Thousands of Iraqis swarmed the streets to celebrate the end of the dictator's rule.
This is the scene in central Baghdad.
Earlier today, we saw this crowd, this small crowd that has swelled to this now, taking off their shoes, throwing them at this statue, which is a deeply insulting Arab gesture.
It looks like it might be coming down.
Before they started.
세계의 평화와 안전을 엄중히 위협하고 있다. 조선민주주의인민공화국 정부는 전쟁을 반대한다. 주권국가의 자주권과 인권을 침해하는 전쟁 행위는 그 어떤 경우에도
Officers and sailors of the USS Abraham Lincoln, my fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed. There are some who feel like that if they attack us, that we may decide to leave prematurely. They don't understand what they're talking about if that's the case. Let me finish. There are some who feel like that, the conditions are such that they can attack us there. My answer is bring them on.
Many members of Congress are now joining in this debate on this question: do we need more troops in Iraq? Among those is Senator John McCain. He is back in Iraq today as part of a congressional delegation, and he says there appears to be a need for some reinforcements. I spoke with Senator McCain yesterday and asked him if the White House should pursue the creation of a UN security force in Iraq. Before the war, General Shinseki, then the Army Chief of Staff, said he thought it would take several 100,000 troops. Secretary Rumsfeld and the CENTCOM commanders said no. There's about 140,000 U.S. troops there now, and Secretary Rumsfeld is saying again after this bombing that he believes that is enough. Is Secretary Rumsfeld wrong?
Sure. In Iraq, I think we may need more military, but I think the specialties count more than the numbers. We need linguists, we need civil affairs people, we need counterintelligence people so that we can do a better job of tracking down these terrorists. Look, you've got unhappy people because they have no electricity or water, and our first priority should be restoring those services. We have the Baathists and criminals who are exacerbating the problem, and of course then we've got people coming from outside. I think we're doing a good job. We cannot fail. We must not fail, and we cannot fail, and we won't fail.
For this Marine gunner, resupplying Charlie Company was never going to be easy. A high-speed dash through Fallujah's dangerous streets. Headlong into a firefight. Resupplying Charlie Company, abruptly switching to reinforce Bravo Company. Their foot patrol pinned down by insurgent gunfire. Incoming rounds whistle and snap overhead. Bullets ricochet off the armored supply vehicle. Suddenly a call. Marines injured. Reinforcement turns into medevac. A race back to base. Resupplying Charlie Company, no longer the objective. For their commander, the focus now on insurgents bypassed in the initial phase of the assault.
The threat that they pose right now is that they hold the ground. We don't know where they are. They can continue to snipe at us and fire RPGs and maybe even construct improvised explosive devices.
Resupplied, Captain Tennant's Marines race for cover en route to the next objective. No flagging, though, on the final push for their objective. an Iraqi school. As promised, no risks taken. Marines rushed forward, no insurgents found.
One of our biggest concerns right now actually is not enemy being in the building, it's the building being booby-trapped.
Later, under cover of darkness, detainees being sent back to base for questioning.
This note that Charlie Company needs something tomorrow.
And a call for much-needed supplies. As day breaks, relative quiet after a night of sporadic explosions. Unpredictably and seemingly out of nowhere, they take fire. A day to be like the one before, maybe. More objectives to be taken. More time for Charlie Company in the firing line. Fallujah was never going to be painless. Nick Robertson, CNN, with Charlie Company in Fallujah, Iraq.
Around 500,000 people travel through Madrid's main railway station every day. But a decade ago, this city was brought to a halt by carnage and terror. 10 bombs exploded during the morning rush hour. The attack and the Conservative government's response to it deepened political and social divisions that already existed in Spain. The government was voted out within days of the attack, after wrongly accusing the Basque separatist group ETA of being behind it.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. In the end, that's what this election is about. Do we participate in a politics of cynicism, or do we participate in a politics of hope?
I actually did vote for the $87 billion before I voted against it.
We continue to pursue our policy of disrupting those who proliferate weapons of mass destruction. Libya has disarmed. The AQCON network has been brought to justice. And as well, we're pursuing a strategy of freedom around the world, because I understand free nations will reject terror. Free nations will answer the hopes and aspirations of their people. Free nations will help us achieve the peace we all want.
I believe in being strong and resolute and determined. And I will hunt down and kill the terrorists wherever they are. But we also have to be smart, Jim. And smart means not diverting your attention from the real war on terror in Afghanistan against Osama bin Laden and taking it off to Iraq. This president has made, I regret to say, a colossal error of judgment. And judgment is what we look for in the President of the United States of America. We pushed our allies aside. And so today, we are 90% of the casualties and 90% of the costs, $200 billion. $200 billion that could have been used for health care, for schools, for construction, for prescription drugs for seniors. And it's in Iraq. And Iraq is not even the center of the focus of the war on terror. The center is Afghanistan, where, incidentally, there were more Americans killed last year than the year before.
But to say that there's only one focus on the war on terror doesn't really understand the nature of the war on terror. Of course we're after Saddam Hussein, bin Laden. He's isolated. 75% of his people have been brought to justice. The killer and the mastermind of the September the 11th attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is in prison. We're making progress. But the front on this war is more than just one place. And of course, Iraq is a central part of the war on terror. That's why Zarqawi and his people are trying to fight us. Their hope is that we grow weary and we leave. The biggest disaster that could happen is that we not succeed in Iraq. We will succeed. We've got a plan to do so. And the main reason we'll succeed is because the Iraqis want to be free.
The president just talked about Iraq as a center of the war on terror. Iraq was not even close to the center of the war on terror before the president invaded it. I think that's wrong. Humvees, 10,000 out of 12,000 Humvees that are over there aren't armored. And you go visit some of those kids in the hospitals today who are maimed because they don't have the armament. This president I don't know if he sees what's really happening on there, but it's getting worse by the day. More soldiers killed in June than before, more in July than June, more in August than July, more in September than in August. And now we see beheadings, and we got weapons.
Help is on the way, but it's certainly hard to tell it when he voted against the $87 billion supplemental to provide equipment for our troops, and then said he actually did vote for it before he voted against it. It's not what Commander-in-Chief does when you're trying to lead troops.
Senator Kerry, 30 seconds.
Well, you know, when I talked about the $87 billion, I made a mistake in how I talk about the war. But the president made a mistake in invading Iraq. Which is worse?
All right, new question, 2 minutes, Senator Kerry. Speaking of Vietnam, you spoke to Congress in 1971 after you came back from Vietnam, and you said, quote, "How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?" Are Americans now dying in Iraq for a mistake?
No, and they don't have to, providing we have the leadership that I'm offering. We're going to build alliances. We're not going to go unilaterally. We're not going to go alone like this president did.
Mr. President, let's extend for a minute.
Let me just one point. I got to answer this.
Exactly. And with reservists being held on duty.
Let me answer this, what he just said about
Well, I
going
wanted to get
alone.
into the issue
You
of the
tell
backdoor
Tony
draft.
Blair we're going alone. Tell Tony Blair we're going alone. Tell Silvio Berlusconi we're going alone. Tell Alexander Kwasniewski of Poland we're going alone. Got 30 countries there. It denigrates an alliance to say we're going alone, to discount their sacrifices. You cannot lead an alliance if you say, you know, you're going alone. And people listen. They're sacrificing with us.
Senator?
Mr. President, countries are leaving the coalition, not joining. 8 countries have left it. If Missouri, just given the number of people from Missouri are in the military over there today, were a country, it would be the 3rd largest country in the coalition, behind Great Britain and the United States. That's not a grand coalition. 90% of the casualties are American. 90% of the costs are coming out of your pockets. I could do a better job. My plan does a better job. And that's why I'll be a better commander-in-chief.
Get up! Up!
Iraqi Prime Minister Alawi today hailed Sunday's election as a victory over terrorism. Millions of Iraqis voted despite much violence before and on Election Day. 35 people were killed yesterday.
Suicide bombings, improvised explosive devices or IEDs, rocket-propelled grenades, and kidnappings and assassinations. Those are the tools of the insurgents waging their war in Iraq. Just over a week after the elections, Iraqis and Americans still are under attack from local and foreign insurgents. And in what now has become a well-established pattern, especially targeted are Iraqi security forces.
Nearly every day, military buses pull up to the Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany. Inside are wounded soldiers who just hours earlier were in Iraq. Just hours after being wheeled into the hospital, 21-year-old specialist Jason Strand was in surgery to have the wound cleaned and sewn up. And less than 24 hours after that, he was up and learning to use crutches. The emphasis here is on speed, and it makes for an almost surreal experience for soldiers. Overall, 90% of soldiers wounded in Iraq survive. In Vietnam, only 76% of the wounded did so.
It's one of the holiest shrines of Shia Islam, Today it's in ruins after a bomb attack that has provoked outrage and fear throughout Iraq. Early this morning, a small group of armed men dressed in police uniforms entered the Al-Askariya shrine and set off two powerful explosions. The blasts brought down the Great Golden Dome, which was one of the largest and most splendid in the Islamic world. Now only a blasted stump remains.
Over the last several years, no single person on this planet has had the blood of more innocent men, women, and children on his hands than Zarqawi.
Al-Zarqawi, Al-Qaeda operative.
He personified the dark, sadistic, and medieval vision of the future of beheadings, suicide bombings, and indiscriminate killings.
Just going to engage it here momentarily with a 500-pound bomb on the target.
Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is dead, killed by a U.S. airstrike.
It was an Air Force strike that eliminated that target, and there was no further direct fire engagement at that point. We knew exactly who was there. We knew it was Zarqawi, and that was the deliberate target that we went to get.
Now Zarqawi has met his end, and this violent man will never murder again. Zarqawi's death is a severe blow to Al-Qaeda.
الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالإعدام شنقا حتى الموت لارتكاب قتل عمد كجريمة ضد النفس.
Army Captain Travis Patriquin. Remember the name.
Travis Patriquin has as much to do with the success that the Americans and the Iraqi government has as anyone else.
Today, Colonel Joe Harrington is the executive assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But in the summer of 2006, he and Patriquin were part of an armored brigade sent to take back the city of Ramadi from Al-Qaeda.
3 straight brigades had lost about 100 soldiers each. Ramadi was the most dangerous place in the world.
With a background in special forces, an Iraqi-style mustache, and passable Arabic, Patriquin bonded with a local sheikh, the flamboyant and slightly shady Sattar Abu Risha, who was fed up with Al-Qaeda and its murderous ways.
Sheikh Sattar was able to rally the other tribes to fight Al-Qaeda, and that's where Travis had such an influence in working with Sheikh Sattar.
Convincing the tribes their future lay with the American side marked the beginning of what became known as the Sunni Awakening. It involved arming and training the tribes to fight Al-Qaeda, a risky idea since the militias might someday turn against the U.S. To sell it, Patriquin created what is perhaps the most famous document of the Iraq War. Of all things, a stick figure PowerPoint briefing. It reads like Iraq for Dummies. Everyone wins except terrorists, which is okay because terrorists suck. 1 month later, Patriquin, Major Megan McClung, and Specialist Vincent Pamonte were killed by a roadside bomb on their way from a meeting with Sheikh Sattar.
The largest number of deaths for U.S. forces have come in central and western Iraq. Roughly 1,100 deaths in Anbar province alone, home to 3 cities where there have been fierce battles: Fallujah, Ramadi, and Hadith.
Coherence of strategy. I don't know how many United States senators believe we have a coherent strategy in Iraq. I don't think we've ever had a coherent strategy. In fact, I would even challenge the administration today to show us the plan that the President talked about the other night. There is no plan. I happen to know Pentagon planners were on their way to the CentralCom over the weekend. They haven't even Team B'd this plan. And my dear friend Dick Lugar talks about coherence of strategy. There is no strategy. This is a ping-pong game with American lives. These young men and women that we put in Anbar province, in Iraq, in Baghdad are not beans. They're real lives.
Now we've had more than 3,000 Americans killed, many thousands more wounded horribly.
and have spent $400 billion, and the Pentagon wants $170 billion more. And as one previous speaker said, with all the added medical and veterans costs, the ultimate cost of this war could reach $2 trillion. Our Constitution does not give us the authority to run another country, as we have in reality been doing in Iraq. With a national debt of almost $9 trillion, we can't afford it. To me, our misadventure in Iraq is both unconstitutional and unaffordable. Some have said it was a mistake to start this war, but that now we are there, we have to, quote, finish the job, and we cannot cut and run. Well, if you find out you're going the wrong way down the interstate, you do not keep going, you get off at the next exit.
The senator from Massachusetts.
All of us remember President Bush saying, "I'm going to take my time and find a new direction." All of us remember that he said, "Do not rush me. I want to talk to the generals. I want to talk to political leaders. I want to talk to people all over this country and all over the world to find out a new policy." And then he comes out with his policy. And what is it? It's a military policy to escalate in Iraq. That is the issue before the United States Senate. Many of us do not believe that this president is right on it. The Baker-Hamilton Commission did not agree with that policy. General Abizaid did not agree with that policy before the Armed Service Committee, and the American people don't. We on this side are interested in protecting American servicemen from the crossfire of a civil war. Some on the other side are more interested in protecting the president from a rebuke for his policy of escalation in Iraq.
I reserve the balance of the 5 minutes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I have great respect for my friend from Arizona. Our troops don't lose war. Bad policy, bad leadership loses wars. They deserve a policy. They deserve a plan. There is no plan. We went to war with too few troops. We went to war unnecessarily. We went to war with these men and women ill-equipped. They're coming home ill-served. It's about time we have the courage to stand up and say to the President, "Mr. President, you have not only put us in harm's way, you have harmed us. You have no policy." We gave the President specific authority, which is our responsibility. It was to take down Saddam if need be. It was to get rid of weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. And it was to get compliance with the UN resolutions. Every one of those have been met. Saddam is dead. There were no weapons. And Iraq is in compliance with the UN. So if you want to be literal about it, his mission no longer has the force of law.
About the Iraq debate, by the way, is I don't hear a lot of discussions about what happens if we fail. But there needs to be a serious discussion about what happens if we create a vacuum into which radical movements flow. If you're worried about Iran, then it's really important that people understand the consequences of us leaving before the job is done. I am deeply concerned about what would happen in the Middle East should America's credibility be diminished as a result of us not keeping our word, as a result of us abandoning millions of people who are anxious to live in a stable, secure, free society.
This war is lost, and that the surge is not accomplishing anything as indicated by the extreme violence.
So in about 2 weeks or so, we'll have all of the forces for the surge, all the combat forces on the ground, and you're going to see the launch of a number of different operations in a number of areas to go after al-Qaeda and other extremist elements.
What can you say to American people who automatically assume that a surge in troops means a more secure Baghdad, means fewer U.S. casualties and not more?
Well, what all of the commanders on the ground have said repeatedly is that this is going to be harder before it gets easier. You have to retake the sanctuaries. You have to regain control of the Baghdad belts. In some cases, you have to regain control of certain neighborhoods.
Concerned are you, though, at this point, that the political piece of this is not going to be there for you?
Oh, I'm concerned. Again, this is what we're about. This is why we're doing this. We can do so much, and then it clearly is up to the Iraqis to make the most of the opportunity that our soldiers and their soldiers and police are fighting and in some cases dying for.
Watch your eyes.
General Petraeus, in the counterinsurgency manual that you wrote, it says that even the strongest U.S. commitment will not succeed if the populace does not perceive the host nation government as having similar will and stamina to our own. The question I think that everybody is asking is, how long will this take? And at what point do we say enough?